video.
Okay. We're talking today with Bill Sleaford of Hesperia, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Sleaford, can you start by telling us a little bit about your own background? For instance, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Yes, I was born in Saint Clair Shores, Michigan, which is in Macomb County, just outside Detroit. And my mom and dad are native Michiganders also. My dad was born in 1895, and he was one of twin boys, born in Brighton, Michigan. And my mother was born in Wademan, Michigan, and she was the oldest of 5 children of the Gruets. And they're local farmers in the greater Wademan area, and they grew various and sundry kind of crops. A lot of those wound up feeding the troops in World War I. My father and his brother were both members of the Michigan National Guard, and they're both in World War I.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, all that I know of as far as my relatives were concerned, I can't really pinpoint for sure. With my grandfather Sleaford, they were all in the service at one time or another. And myself and my 2 brothers, one older and one younger, we were in World War II together. My oldest brother was in the Medical Corps. My youngest brother was in the Navy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how old were you when Pearl Harbor happened?
Actually, when Pearl Harbor itself happened, I was only 17.
Mm-hmm.
But I graduated the following June, and right after graduation, I was 18.
Mm-hmm. Now, before Pearl Harbor, had you been paying much attention to what was going on in the world?
Absolutely, I had, because when my family relocated, because my father was a master machinist working in the greater Detroit area in Continental Motors Corporation, who had a plant in Detroit and also one in Muskegon at the time, found out about him, and they made him an offer to come to Muskegon, which the family did in November of 1940. Why do I remember November of 1940 real well? Because the day that we moved, my brother and I we cleaned up the house and shut it up. In his 1931 Model A Ford, we drove from Muskegon, from St. Clair Shores to Muskegon, and it was raining cats and dogs the whole day, just a miserable day. And every time the car would go through a big water puddle, it would splash up and hit the coil, and the coil had a crack in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the engine would conk out, but the residual heat of the engine itself, it wasn't long, and it would dry itself out again, and it would start operating again. But that day was November the 11th, 1940. Why is that day of any interest? November 11th, 1940 was the huge storm on Lake Michigan, where about 15 or 20 vessels went down to Davy Jones Locker out there on that very same day. That's the day we moved to Muskegon. I then transferred from Lakeshore High School, where I went probably a good part of my life, in that one little school there, to Muskegon High School. I had 59 guys and girls in my class in Lakeshore. There were 349 in the Muskegon Class A school. That was a real shock, going from, seemed to me like from my school to a college campus, literally. And we do have a campus, and it was a lot nicer, I think, in those days than it is now. But that's history. But we came up here, and I got involved, but I was in athletics in the little school, but there was no chance of getting in the athletics in the big school. These boys and girls that were in athletics here in Muskegon kind of went through the process of getting started in Little League and one thing and another, going right on through, and they practically like you do in a machine shop. You go through a training session, and then if you're good enough, the coach lets you in. And he told me flat out, it was nice of him to tell me flat out. He said, Bill, he said you handle yourself good and so on and so forth, but I don't dare put you on first string, because we got a lot of nice boys and girls here that can do the job, and they've been with us and they perform for it too. So he says, it's up. If it suits you, you can sit here on the bench and maybe go with the JVs and so forth, or do whatever else. So I figured, well, I'm in a new town, I might as well see if there's anything out there. So had my worker's permit, and I found myself a job in a supermarket. worked in that, and went to school, got on and changed my curriculum from general commercial to general retail. Yeah, because, and oh, incidentally, part of my my training in high school was I took machine shop, and I took woodworking shop, and I took several courses in automotive also, and learned everything about an automobile and a truck that you could learn, including transmissions and one thing or another. And having always been interested in automobiles, that was right down my alley. I want to just backtrack just a hair. Before we left Detroit from Muskegon, I submitted a request, an application to Ford Motor Corporation, and they had the Ford Trade School in those days. Maybe a lot of folks have never heard of that, but Ford Motor had a Ford Trade School where you could go in there and you could start off as a super flunky, and you get different assignments on from there on up to the time that you put four years plus in, and when you graduate from there, you were recognized as a potential for a supervisor or managerial job at some time when you had enough under your belt with the Ford Motor Company. I know it worked because a couple of my buddies that did go on the program that I knew and I went to high school with became superintendents and so forth. They were building B-24s, and some of them I could have flown in because all of our B-24s we flew combat in were all made at Willow Run.
Right. Now, when you then actually graduated from high school, then did you get into work beyond supermarkets, or?
After I graduated and after I became 18, I was able to go to work in industry. And at that time, I went talked to my boss in the supermarket and explained to him why, and plus the fact my folks had underwritten an automobile. I bought a 1936 Ford in 1941, which is pretty good for a high school kid. I only had a 5-year-old car. But I vowed that I would pay that off before I ever went in the service. So I took the job in industry with the Continental Motors Corporation in Muskegon. And I did perform various duties as a non-productive worker there because of the fact I was young and that I wasn't going to be there very long. They didn't want to get me started on something and have to pull me out. And during that process, I worked all the overtime that I could work and so forth, and I paid my automobile off. So when I left in the service, my car was in good shape, and it was all paid off just in case. You know, you never know. So I never figured I'd at least stick my folks with any big bills.
Okay. Now, when did you actually enter the service then?
I entered the service on December 1, 1942, and the entry was, we left from the armory in Muskegon. It's not there anymore. And we traveled from there to Battle Creek, Michigan, and stayed overnight in a Burdick Hotel. There was an old hotel there for years and years called the Burdick Hotel. We stayed overnight there and had what we thought was a wild night in Battle Creek, which is just sad as could be. There was nothing going. And the following morning, we went out to Fort Custer, and that was the point of entry into the service right there at Fort Custer in Battle Creek. And it so happens that when I went in, there were 5 guys that I knew from my class in high school. We all went into the service together, and 3 of us stayed together for quite a long time. And the one fellow who's now dead, he and I reapplied for cadets, and his name was Slater. That was another one, Don Peterson, and Don naturally alphabetically stacked up before S's did for Sleaford. He went before the reviewing board. And before he went through it, he was all worried. And I said, "What's the matter, Don?" And he said, he says, "I'd like to have my uniform look better than it does." And I wasn't able to get it in out of the cleaners. He and I were the exact same size. So I said, "I'll tell you what, Don, worry not. Here, use mine." So we swapped. They call it in the military. They call it a blouse. So I let him have my blouse. He went in and did his interview and passed it. Somewhere along the meantime was swapping back. He must have had a rabbit's foot in his pocket or one thing or another. And he took it back out again, and when he took it back out, he was kind of excited, and he didn't rebutton the flap. And I was unaware of it. I was excited too. I went in and got before this reviewing board, and the reviewing board was composed of officers that major rank was the lowest rank, and I went on up to full colonel. And I went through all the questions in the reviewing board, and the last question I got was from the colonel himself. And he said to me, Mr. Sleaford, are you proud of your uniform? And I said, I certainly am, sir. And he said, well, I wondered whether you were or not. And I thought, wow, what a funny question that is. And he says, because you must not be too proud of it, because you're going around here and you're appearing in front of this board with one of your buttons unbuttoned on the front of your uniform. Like, oh, God. And I think that possibly had something to do with causing me not to pass that review, and they put me up for another review later on. I didn't know that at the time. They had already had set me up for, but then again, as I thought about, they may have had their quota for cadets at the time. I don't know. So Don Peterson went through the program. They were literally pushing cadets through the pilot program. That's what I wanted to do. He was about my size and everything. And Don wound up as a pilot in the B-24s. And he was in the 8th Air Force in England also. And he came back home again. And I knew Don and knew his brothers and sisters and so forth. That happens in a town, even the size of Muskegon. But I didn't make it, and as luck would have it, I did have some luck though. As a result of this, they were just starting the College Training Detachment Program, CTD it was called. And these were conducted in various colleges and universities. And when I went through the program, and I was accepted, but I was accepted into the college training program, and I went to University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. And with my background of having already been in the service for a while, I had been in over a year by that time. I figured I was an old veteran. I knew all the angles, which I didn't. And we went to Knoxville, Tennessee, and we were actually put up in dorms and so forth, college dorms, because there weren't any adult or male students to speak of there at all, and just and about half of what you normally see for the ladies. And it wasn't too awfully long after that they moved us out of the dorms and put us in the stadium. That's where all the athletes used to be billeted in the stadium when the school was going. So we wound up in the stadium there, and it was great. And we got our aerodynamic classes and everything there, and it was a real comprehensive program. Really shoved at you hard. If you dropped a pencil, if you weren't careful, you'd miss 2 or 3 weeks by the time you picked it up, got back into things. And And during that time also, we were exposed to actual flight training. And the flight training was in Piper Super Cubs and Cessnas and so forth, what was available. What they weren't actually military flight training programs. And so we went through that, and I someplace or another, I had a logbook on all my flights and so forth, and the comments of my instructor and such, and everything was all positive there. In fact, I even soloed while I was there. And it was kind of an interesting solo because I soloed in the afternoon, right after lunch. It's in summertime. It's pretty hot. And the airfield that we were flying off of was World War I type airfield, no blacktop or anything like that. We were flying off of grass. We were flying off of what they call tail draggers. It wasn't a tricycle. It had a tail in the rear of the airplane, and they had 3 leaves on it, and which was like a leaf spring, and then this piece of casting that was welded to the final spring with a wheel on it, and the wheel was on like a caster. It would go 360 degrees, and you could move around there. That afternoon, when I got my chance to solo, I took off the airfield, fine and dandy. Everything was great. I was all by myself, and I was singing, I think, humming the Wild Blue Yonder song to myself. And I followed the instructions and ran the flight pattern and so forth, and came back in. But on the way back in on the flight path, we were going over plowed fields. And then this landing field was on an island, and quite a large river right there, and we had to pass over the river. And I guess I probably should have thought about the thermals, because there were thermals coming up off the plowed field, and when you passed over the water, there weren't any thermals. The bottom dropped out. And so I'm making an approach like I was taught to do, And fortunately, my instructor, as I did, and I still do, I believe in what you call power landings. You keep your power on your airplane, keep your flying speed up and so forth. You don't cut back and go gliding in, because when that happens, if something goes wrong, it's that microsecond or two that you don't have power and you're losing your airspeed, and your lift can kill you. So I kept my power up there, and I was making a power landing, and I no sooner passed over the edge of that plowed up field, just over the drop off to the river, and the bottom dropped out. And I started right on down for the river, and I just hit it up, just hit the speed up and the power to the airplane, and came over, and I was still settling quite a bit when I hit the other side of the long end of the runway, and I pancaked in there, hard enough that broke the tail wheel off. And so when that tail wheel broke off, and here these pieces of steel were hanging out there, it dug in like you can't believe, and I was plowing right then and there, but it stopped the airplane. I didn't ground loop or anything like that. And I thought, oh God, here I go. I'm going to get washed out right then and there. So my flight instructor, everybody came over, and I saw everything was okay. I got a mild chewing out, and then he smiled, and he says, that was a damn good landing. He says, I couldn't have done any better myself. And he says, I fault myself for not warning you about that, knowing what the conditions were. So as far as my airmanship was concerned and so forth, my interest in flying, and it's never abated. I've always been interested.
Now, about when was this? What date or month or?
That was 1943. Yeah, and it was in the fall of 1943. And after that, after I went to the classification center, someone in there, I guess, looked at that and saw my solo flight was a good one, and I walked away from the air. But I did have on the books a crash on my solo landing, and there weren't too many other comments, and what caused it, midday and one thing or another was noted down there, and one thing or another. So I don't know whether that had anything to do with it or not, but also at the same time, you've heard of the Tuskegee. They were pushing these group of fellows through the people of color for pilots, and I don't know how many different flight training fields they had bottled up. That would have been enough by itself. But in the meantime, international politics came into play, and it got to the point where General Stilwell and some other people over there in China were trying to solidify some things with the Chinese and one thing or another for our landing fields and so forth in that area. So a lot of these warlords had sons that they wanted to get flight training, so they came in and they took over all the rest of the pilots' schools. And I didn't find this out until afterwards, why we didn't get the chance to go to flight school. They just said, there's no opportunity for you to go to flight school, but how lucky you are. If you want to, you can remain in the Air Force, or if you want to, you can go back to the ground, to the infantry and so forth. With me, there was no way I was not gonna stay in the Air Force because I enlisted in the Air Force. It was right on my enlistment papers, so they really couldn't do it. Maybe this day and age they do some unusual things this day and age, but not then. They pretty much followed the programs. So I did. After that, I stayed in the Air Force, and I wound up going to gunnery school.
Okay, and where was that?
My first gunnery school was in Panama City, Florida, Tyndall Field. And it was a good gunnery school, and we got all the usual gunnery training and so forth, including one of the most interesting things that I could liken to civilian life was shooting skeet, trap shooting. And we would practice shooting trap to, shall we say, to hone up your shooting eye and so forth for items on the fly, ones that you couldn't predict what was going to happen to them and so forth. And you were given you fired a grouping of 25 targets and 25 shots. And anything above 20 was satisfactory. The closer you got to 25, the more attention you got. And I was lucky enough, and I guess I had a good shooting eye. I pretty much shot 23 to 25 most of the time. So happened that my buddy, who was one I told you about a little earlier, about Ernie, the guy that went on the carpetbagger mission with me. He was also a very good shot with a shotgun, and a good man in all the gunnery school. We didn't go to the same gunnery school.
Right.
I went to gunnery school in Panama City, Florida, and he went to a gunnery school in Harlingen, Texas. They had gunnery schools all over the place in those days.
Now, as part of the training there, did they have you shooting at towed targets in the air and that kind of thing?
That was part of the curriculum, yes, but it wasn't stressed as much because this is predictable. I mean, that airplane hauling that target would maintain an altitude and maintain the speed. So you know, you take a look and put it into the computer in the head and say, well, gee, this is no big deal. You know, you just lead it by so many rads, and the rads you got the gunnery sights are in rings, and each from each separation where the ring goes through, it's called a rad, and depending on what the target was doing, you had to lead it by so many rads in order to make hits on it. Well, when they're towing these socks, incidentally, you know who flew those airplanes? Williams Auxiliary Service pilots. They flew those tow planes, B-26s and AT-6s and one thing or another.
Right.
Pretty good gals. But at any rate, they were predictable. They'd fly the same speed, they'd hold the same altitude and so forth. You just get it out there and hold the rads on it for a couple minutes and squeeze them off and get your hits.
Did that experience do you any good just in terms of getting used to firing a machine gun out of a moving airplane, or was it so different
I suppose
from reality?
it had some advantages, but it was up in the air firing like that. But it was an open cockpit situation, and it was nothing like you were going to see, in a heavy bomber.
So you were flying like in the back of a trainer or something
Yes,
like that?
yeah, in the rear seat, and you were belted in and so on and so forth, and you had a 50 caliber flexible, or sometimes we shot 30s too, and after shooting 50 calibers when you're shooting a 30, it was like shooting a BB gun.
Right.
Nothing to it, but that kind of fulfilled the bill, and you got the feel of what it felt like up in the air and so forth, and the slipstream past the barrel of the machine gun was kept it real cool. You could, if you wanted to waste ammo, you could hold it down for a long burst, but they usually suggested short bursts, from 2 to 8, and if you're really doing some damage to the attacking airplane, it wasn't unusual to hold it down to 8. In fact, in the excitement of battle, I'm sure as we're sitting here that there was awful lot of bursts, a lot more than 8.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, where did they send you after Panama City then?
After Panama City, we sat down and waited for new orders, and they sent, after we were all qualified and so forth, I went through and they were gathering up they sent groups of people from pilot school, from bombardier school, from navigation school, the gunnery schools, radio school, and one thing or another, all up to kind of a collecting area, if you want to call it. My vocabulary is kind of beating me up here, but we all went to a big area of a manpower area is what it was, and they would be pulling names and trying to match crews.
Right.
And we became a crew right there, and I met my pilot, my co-pilot, and all the rest of the guys for the first time right there.
Okay.
It was in Lincoln, Nebraska.
All right.
Yeah. And after we got together in Lincoln, Nebraska, we all went by train from Lincoln, Nebraska to Mountain Home, Idaho. Mountain Home, Idaho was a brand new air base that had just been built. In fact, to save materials, these big, if you I don't know whether you've seen very many aircraft hangars of the past, but that whole hangar was all built out of wood. All the beams and everything were all built out of wood, and they got these big darn doors on there to open up and close, and move the airplanes in and out. Everything was made out of wood.
Now, what kind of planes do they have there?
B-24s.
They built a wooden building big enough to hold B-24s.
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay.
But only the ones that were really working on it, they had to be undercover. For all the rest of them were out on stakeouts or hold downs. And that's the way it was overseas too. There were no airplanes in
Right.
hangars. All the airplanes were in what they call revetments, big mounds of earth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what was in the center of them, but they were in a U configuration, and a tow motor would hook onto the nose wheel and back them into these, and if somebody would come along strafing, sure they could get the airplane from above, but they get less hits that way.
Right.
Yeah. So that's where they were, how they were overseas, and they weren't in a row. They were all off position. So a guy couldn't start at one end like they did in Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Go right straight down through and get 50 or one of them. He'd have to move back and forth, and when he did that, he lost his gunnery advantage and his aim and so forth. So.
Right. Okay. Now then, so is it then in Idaho when you start flying together?
Yes,
in the
we started
B-24s?
flying together as a crew in Idaho.
Okay.
Yeah, and our senior pilot, he came from Oklahoma, and he had been a student at the University of Oklahoma, Norman, Oklahoma, and he went through one of these affiliated college training programs there, and then he went to cadets from there on in and became a second lieutenant, and he in turn was promising enough and was a good enough pilot from the training programs that the Air Force made him a pilot instructor, and he went from there to Smyrna, Tennessee, and Smyrna, Tennessee is south and east of Nashville about 40 miles. And there was a B-24 training base there in Smyrna, and his name was Richard Anderson, and he trained I don't know how many crews down there, and in the process he was promoted to a first lieutenant, and we were one of the few crews at that air base we went to that had a first lieutenant as an airplane commander. That's what they called them, airplane commanders.
Now, had he asked to be transferred to active duty and get out of the training
I
command?
really don't know. I would have imagined Dick might have. Yes, he might have. And our co-pilot, his name was Hobart. I can't think of that rascal's last name, but we all knew him as Hobie. Second lieutenant, a real guy, real character, a real guy's guy. He had been a staff sergeant and a mechanic crew chief in an air base in northern Texas. And he went to the cadet program and went through the pilot training program, and they made him a co-pilot with Lieutenant Anderson. And our original bombardier was a flight officer. He was from Idaho Falls, Idaho. Of all things, we went out to train in Mountain Home, and he was practically home. And his name was Lauren Roberts. And he didn't like his name, so he had them all everybody called him Robbie. That was his nickname. A flight officer is not a commissioned officer. He's in between. He's like a warrant officer is in the Army and also the Navy. And heck of a neat guy. He was 19 years old. What a character. Sit down and play cards with him and what have you, like nothing. And only people were a little standoffish in the crew was mostly that pilot. The head, and I guess he figured that he read some books on military procedures and so forth, and he should keep himself away from the crew. But the rest of them are all pretty much right down to earth. We wound up with a navigator from Texas. He was a captain. He outranked everybody on the crew. And he had been a navigator in working for Vinegar Joe Stilwell in Burma, and he flew the hump.
Right.
And I don't know on how many different flights he had. It seemed to me he told me once he had 60 flights over the hump, and I guess they weren't. None of them were a picnic. And Japanese Zeros used to jump them, and they were in, you might say, just passenger planes.
Yeah, and just flying over the Himalayas at that altitude was an adventure all by itself.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the weather was real screwball there too. So yeah. So at any rate, he wound up on our crew. And it wasn't long after that, something happened, and he got hurt. So we lost him. And same thing happened to our bombardier. He got hurt. We lost him. So we lost, to my knowledge, we lost 2 guys on my crew, and that was the navigator and a bombardier. The replacement bombardier was from California, and Robbie would. 2 Robbies would make one of this other guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was a big man, I'll tell you, he was a big guy. And the navigator replacement was from Long Island, New York. And he was of the Jewish faith. And I said to him one time, I said, God darn it, Bert, his name was Bert Cohen. I said, what the hell are you thinking about, guy? I said, those krauts get a hold of you and find out you're Jewish, boy, I said, you're gonna go. Your life isn't gonna be worth a nickel. You're gonna go through hell. But he said, I promised my family and some of the other parts of over in Europe that I would do what I could.
Mm-hmm.
And he just didn't think of the rest of it. He said, nope. He said, you guys are hanging yours out. I'm gonna hang it right with you.
Now, what was your specific assignment on the plane?
Well, I originally went on the plane as a flight engineer, based on all my knowledge and so forth, of aircraft engines and so forth, and mechanics and such. I hadn't had any formal training as far as the B-24 was concerned, but going way back to when I was in grade school and high school, I was very, very interested in airplanes.
Right.
So interested that when I was 11 years old and my older brother was 15 years old, we saved up our money and pooled it together, and for $1.50 a piece, for the grand total of $3 for the both of us, we had a flight on a tin goose. You ever hear of a tin goose? Ford Tri-Motor.
All right, yes.
Ford Tri-Motor, tin goose, that flew into Roseville, Michigan, which was close to where we lived, and was giving rides for a $1.50 ride for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that would hold 10 passengers and a flight crew, a pilot and co-pilot. He didn't carry a radio operator, but so a pilot and a co-pilot and 20 passengers, 10 on each side of the airplane. We'd flew all around the area there, up over Lake Saint Clair and so forth. And right then and there, I said to myself, I want to do this. I want to fly.
All right. Now I got to pull it back into the story here. You said it started out as a flight engineer. Were planning on being that? Is that what you wound up doing?
I wound up doing several things.
Okay.
Including, I was electronics, and I wound up even being had taken all the photographs for security photographs and so forth, and bomb strikes for the airplane. We had a hatch in the back of the B-24 which we went up through, and that's where we mounted the big aerial photograph photography unit in there. And on the knowledge that I had experience doing that was instrumental as far as them making up their mind for sure that they wanted me on that special flight over Europe, because they had some kind of special film in, and the camera was set up some way that I didn't understand, but it was set up, and it was not for me to understand, it was just for me to take good pictures, which I had in the past. And so every so often at certain junctures of latitude and one thing or another, when we got there was a picture to be taken, and I got warnings, like you get warnings to bail out of the airplane. And then when the green light hit, I took pictures. I took a series of 6 pictures. And when we finally left the airplane, though the camera was unique, what was most important, the pilot said, is Bill, make sure you get the photographs, get the photographic pack. So I had that pack out, and I had it stuffed inside my flight gear, and I never did hear what happened to those, but I had the photographs. I brought them back.
Okay. Let's kind of pull ourselves back here again. We've gotten your crew together, essentially, and you're training in Idaho. How long did they have you working together in Idaho before they moved you somewhere else?
Let's see. We got to Idaho and started performing as a crew. It seemed to me like either first or middle part of March, and we trained and worked together as a crew, and one thing another, went on various flights, long distances and so forth. And we left Idaho in the end of August.
Okay, of 44?
Yep, of 44.
All right.
Yeah.
And then where'd you go from there?
Overseas.
Okay. Describe that trip for me.
Man, we had an airplane. They brought new airplanes into Mountain Home, and we were assigned an airplane by serial number of the airplane, and we flew from there to Topeka, Kansas, and we went through a lot of sessions there, briefing sessions and so forth. Got a bunch of new shots. The Army was crazy about shots. They were crazy about shots and going to the dentist. And then we got our orders, and we got a 10-day furlough. Came home on a 10-day furlough, and we got back the orders when the airplanes were out there and so forth. And somebody in my crew had some nose paintings made up. But I won't tell you what they looked like.
Okay.
But they were interesting.
They were appealing to young men?
Yes, oh
Okay.
yes. And yeah, every place we went with an airplane afterwards, the guys asked who painted that. Where was the model? But at any rate, we flew from there to some air base up in Massachusetts. Seems to be around Springfield, Massachusetts. There, they had an air base up there. They had B-24s in it. In fact, my friend Don Peterson had been there also. And from there, we flew to Gander,
Newfoundland, yeah.
Gander, Maine.
It was Bangor, Maine. There's Gander, Newfoundland. So.
Let's see. It was in Maine where
Bangor,
it was.
then.
Yeah. And our nose wheel gave away when we landed. And two members of our crew got hurt there on that. It seems to me it was a navigator. Bert wasn't on our crew at the time. Oh yeah, okay. That's for Captain Mode got hurt there. So we couldn't fly over the ocean without a good navigator.
Right.
So that's when I got a hold of Bert Cohen, and he met us in Casper, Wyoming, at an air base there, and we flew around Casper. And part of the reason why we were flying around Casper, I found out later on, is because they wanted our crew to be doing some flights around the mountains, over and around in Austria and one thing or another. And we didn't know that at the time.
Right.
So we trained with him, and then we went back to Topeka and more or less just touched base in Topeka. And incidentally, we lost our airplane when it crashed.
Yeah.
It didn't crash total, but the whole front end got smashed in and so forth.
And you lost a perfectly good nose in the process.
Yeah, yep. Oh yeah, geez, that hurt. Worse than that, we had a bunch of booze in there that we lost too. Yeah. We figured we were going to take our own with us, which we did. All good stuff too. But and then instead of flying back over there again, we wound up going over by ship. And here, name of the it was a Liberty ship named the Marine Robin.
Okay.
And we shipped out of New York, the port of New York. And I can still remember we went in the dang middle of the night, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I don't have a total axe to grind, but I have a pretty good one to grind with a Red Cross. No Red Cross people around anywhere. Guess who was there? The Salvation Army. They were there, and they were real helpful and took care of us. And any time was really important for somebody to be there to bolster us up a little bit. It was the Salvation Army was there, not the Red Cross. But to this day, I'm not too square on the Red Cross.
All right. What was the trip across the ocean like?
Well, I wanted to say uneventful, but that's not so, because we must have had some submarines trying to get at our. We were in a convoy, and we had some flat tops in the convoy, and I think that's what the subs are trying to do is get. And they weren't full blown aircraft carriers, or what they call mini carriers, and they were trying to whack the mini carriers, but they never got a chance to.
Okay. Well, the carriers were there to get the subs.
Yeah, well, but there was enough destroyers there to get the subs too, which they did, I think.
Okay. but it was sort of part of. But those were escort carriers, and it was a combination of the
Yeah,
aircraft
yeah,
and
yeah.
the support ships
So we had,
that did it in.
from near as I can figure out, we tried to count them a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
We could see about 50 ships in that convoy.
Yep.
Yeah, and there probably were more that we couldn't see, but there were 50 in there. And there may have been one or two of our subs in there someplace too. We don't know, but at any rate, we went from the port of New York to. We didn't actually come in and dock in Ireland, but we were the whole convoy hove to there, and we sat there for a little while, and the next thing we know, different ships are going off this way.
Mm-hmm.
We broke up, and
Right.
then there was our ship, and there were about maybe 10 ships that went with us. We went into Liverpool, England, from there, and that's where we landed in Liverpool. And the thing that floored me in Liverpool was all the ships that were sunk in the harbor there at Liverpool that were Stukas and German dive bombers and one thing another got them. There were ships all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Right, had gone to Davy Jones and upper structures and so forth. They're sticking out of the water.
And they were just still there.
They're still there. Yeah, they're still. And they were there when we shipped out. We shipped back out of there too.
Okay, I'm just going to pause this here. Do you think we could get her to turn the sound down on? All right, we've gotten you as far as Liverpool.
Okay. Yeah. We debarked from the ship at Liverpool, and the military had put enough people in different places overseas and so forth. You go through and they got all special numbers on your helmet and everything you have, and so based on that, there's a jigsaw puzzle that goes together somewhere, and using that, and people that understood it over there, the receiving people, they even had us put in trains based on what our numbers were.
Right.
And each car had people for different air bases and so forth. So, and I don't know whether you've ever been in a foreign land, in particular with those little small gauge trains and such that they have, but I was really impressed with them. They weren't very big, but they were very efficient. Well, this operation was very efficient, I'll tell you, because you pulled into a station and stopped, and there wasn't any time at all. The doors on your car did not open if you weren't going to get off, and they opened up. Only the ones that were going to get off, and they went all the way on both sides, and people could debark there, and it wasn't any time at all, and you'd hear toot, 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 and zip, they were going again.
Now, where did you get sent to?
Got sent to a little hamlet called Halesford, England. In Halesford, let's see, I'm trying to give you an idea of a real small community. It was much smaller than Hesperia. Nuera, are you familiar with Nuera? About the size of Nuera, maybe not that big. Just a small community, pretty compressed, and there were 2 or 3 churches there, and ever-present bar,
Right.
which what the hell they call those? They didn't call them bars over there.
They're pubs.
Pubs, yeah. The pub, which was a social scene of the area, and a few other necessary places, the doctor's office and one thing and that was about it. It was really small. Now, and I don't know whether they had it beforehand, but my bomb group was instrumental in opening up a library in Halesford, and there's a library there, and it's dedicated to the people of Halesford and also dedicated to the visitors who came there during World War II, our bomb group. And I've never been there. I've talked to a couple guys that have been there, and there's various and sundry articles that appeared in military papers and one thing and another under glass in there, and some photographs of the base commander and then the airships and so forth that we had there. The air base where we were was created for the RAF, and there had been an RAF group there before we were, and they were gone, and we went in there, and as we left, another RAF group was coming back in there to replace us.
So about when did you get there?
Gosh, come to think of it, I got my dates mixed up. Seems to me we got there about the 1st of August.
Okay.
Something like that. We flew out of there 14 times ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
but the group was already there.
Right.
The group got there. Near as I could figure out, they went as a group from Wendover, Utah, which
Mhm.
wasn't too far from Mountain Home. I think they got there in April of 1944,
Mm-hmm.
and they were operational in May, and they were involved in D-Day and
Mhm.
so forth. In fact, the 49th Bomb Group flew over 139 missions in just about 6 months or less.
Mm-hmm.
And then the commanding general of the 8th Air Force decided that he would bring our bomb group back because we had the best bomb strike record and so forth that
Mhm.
the 49th did of several of the other air groups in the 2nd Bomb Division. So they figured they'd bring us back to the States and convert us from B-24s to B-29s, which
Mhm.
they did. So they were operational from, we'll say, approximately the 1st of May of 1944 to about the time that the group left. We got back on ships about somewhere around the 1st of December.
Okay. Now, in between then, you were flying missions then
Yeah,
over continental.
The group was, yes.
Can you describe the first mission you went on?
Oh my, yeah. First mission we went on, we didn't know what it was all about because we didn't really know. That was the first time we really got seriously shot at.
Right.
And that started to happen as soon as we got past the over the English Channel, was coming away from the channel on the east side and got over Europe
Mhm.
and that shoreline, and they were anti-aircraft batteries. They were waiting to meet us.
Mhm.
Yeah, and they knew we were coming. They knew our altitude. They knew our ground speed and one thing and another. So, and they could see us. And that's the worst thing. If they had to shoot at you by radar and by electronic sights, you had a chance. We had some stuff called chaff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anybody ever told you about chaff or not, but chaff is like you hang on your your Christmas tree there,
Right. Like tinsel. Yeah.
tinsel, and the chaff would fall through the air in clumps and so forth, and in big groups, and it would set up a false target
Right.
for the anti-aircraft. So if they couldn't see it and you could get enough chaff out there, you didn't get as much bother from anti-aircraft
Mhm.
units. But if they could see you, they could kill you, really, because
Mhm.
they bracket you on both sides and then just come moving in.
Right. And this is sort of maybe on the Dutch coastline there.
Starting off
Yeah.
the Dutch coastline
Right.
and going in, and depending on, sure they'd like to get as many of us we could
Mm.
in that area there, but one time on one flight there were 1,200 4-engine bombers in the air all at one time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine 1,200 all up there at about the same time, about the same altitude, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was, yeah, for damn sure, maybe 50 to 100 feet at different levels. So the prop wash and so forth didn't
Mhm.
bother so much, and you're trying to hold tight formations. Going through the air, of that 1,200, there were 3 missions in that 1,200 group,
Mm-hmm.
and the Germans didn't know where it was going. They just knew we were going east.
Mm-hmm.
A big flight of massive. In other words, from horizon to horizon
Mhm.
were airplanes. In vapor trails were air crystals formed on the wingtips and all the engine nacelles and all
Mhm.
and all the empennage in the back. Anything that was out there by itself was creating vapor trails. So all you could see was airplanes glinting and vapor trails.
Mhm.
You were up above the clouds, and over in England, it's rare in the time of the year I'm talking about that you saw the sun,
Mm-hmm.
unless you were above the clouds, and then you saw it. But down below it was like we're looking outside today. Today'd be a bright day over there.
Mhm.
It was murky. So at a given time period and so forth, by instructions that you had in your flight journal and the flight pouch, but you weren't to open until such and such
Mhm.
a time, you'd open them up and find out where you were going.
Right.
And they had the formations made up pretty much where part of them could go this
Right.
way, some would go straight ahead, and some would go that way. And then again, you might even, then you fly so many minutes, at a given speed and such a heading, and then you'd still turn and move. So to keep them guessing, so to speak. So the liftoff is going crazy trying to figure out where the hell you're going and how many planes that come up and meet you with.
Okay. Now, when you were flying, did you have escort fighters going with you?
Only for a short time, because in those days the fighters were P-47s and so forth, big airplanes and big engines. They sopped up the fuel, and they couldn't go in very far with us and still get back. Not until pretty much after we were out of there, and just about the time that we got out of there, started getting P-51s in there. The P-51s were a great airplane, and they could travel long distances themselves, and they could accompany you to the target and come back with you. Of course, our airplanes and their airplanes, they weren't dumb fools when the anti-aircraft got real tough.
Yeah.
They were damn fools. They stayed around. They took the pacing that we had to take. You had to maintain your airspeed, and when the bombardier took over, he flew the airplane, and he maintained airspeed, and he maintained the altitude and so forth, and he was on his heading to the target, and once you get, and it was about 7 miles that you were steady as could be for kind of loud, and man, you were dead meat then. Yeah, if they could see you, it was tough going.
And how much damage did your airplane take?
Well, it didn't take too much because I'm
you
here.
got back, yes.
Okay, but it all depends on where an airplane gets hit. If you get hit in the bomb bay, of course you got your bombs in there, and by that time, at a certain level after you pass over the coast, you arm your bombs. So the bombs are armed, and a lucky hit would blow the whole damn thing up again. B-24s had a lot of fuel lines that come from the wing tanks and so forth, went through the bomb bay area and to the engines and one thing or another, and there were always fuel vapors in the bomb bay area and other parts of the airplane. And I've got a little thing right here from phosphorus right there, and they would send phosphorus warheads up. And naturally, if you had any fuel vapors or anything in there, it would bam, and that was it, and it just a big explosion, big flash, and you were all gone,
Do you think a B-17 was any safer than a B-24 in terms of how it was engineered?
Not really. I mean, they had a bigger wing, but we had a Davis wing. Their wing was from the nose to the tail was wider and gave a better lift and glide pattern close to the fuselage. The B-24 had the Davis wing on. The Davis wing was created for flying boats, and it went way back, and it was a very, very good wing, and it was what they call a high wing monoplane, and we had a longer range on the B-24 than the B-17 did. We could fly higher than the B-17, and we could carry a heavier load than the B-17. But I've flown in both of them, and the B-17 was how do I put this? Gave you the feeling that there's more airplane around you as an airplane goes than the B-24 did, because the B-24 was big and boxy, and between you and the outside was 25 thousandths of aluminum, and that's all, and that's not very damn thick.
Yep.
I'll tell you. And there was an expression that the guys hung on the B-24. They call it the whistling. Who's going to watch this? Do you have to edit it much?
No.
Okay, the whistling shit house is what they call it, and that was because of the boxiness, because how it was made, and all the little holes that should be there, or there were, because they were two locator spots or one thing or another when they're making a thing. One would get in there and gush through there and whistle and one thing or another. And if you went back in the waist section that was behind the bomb bay and where the ball turret was, it was like taking some meat back there to deep freeze quick, flash freeze, because it was colder than Dickens back there. There was no heat back there at all. Anything from the pilot's crew compartment on, no heat. at all. It was all just freezing.
Now, what was your station on the plane?
Well, I wound up in the waist area, and because I was taking films and so forth, and bomb strikes and so forth, and I pretty much, however, I was qualified to perform in any turret there was, and I was qualified in my first qualification area was a top turret where the flight engineer would normally go. Now we were fortunate on our crew because I was oriented and qualified to perform if need be as a flight engineering function. We had the normal flight engineer, and we had, of all things, a guy that went through flight engineering training with this fellow, who wound up being a tail gunner. But there were actually 3 of us on there who could if they had to be, you know. And now, out of our crew of 10, there were 8 of us in there that had enough flight instruction that if it came to it, we could make what you call a controlled crash.
Right.
Bring it in on the, you know, on his belly someplace in the grass and one thing or another, and of course 100 octane and those kind of engines and pretty damn good qualified gas tanks and so forth. We didn't have much trouble with the fuel tanks breaking open on a crash, unless it was a real bad one. It was about anything about 40 or 45 degree angle going on the ground would just break everything all to hell. You know? Yeah.
All right. Now, where were some of the places that you took missions to?
Well, we went to more than once. Went to Frankfurt. We went to Schweinfurt. Schweinfurt was a ball bearing works, and that was a tough one to go to because that was heavily protected. Our group, before I became part of the group, went to Ploiesti twice, and it was not a real successful raid either time. And our one of the few people that we had in our group that was flying in our group, who was a West Point graduate, was a lieutenant colonel, and due to his heroic actions and one thing or another, I never did find out what all that was all about. But he was a Medal of Honor winner on that mission, and he and his airplane went down right in the midst of this whole thing when this damn refinery is afire.
Yeah.
So they never came back, but he got that award posthumously. And
Did you fly to Berlin?
never did.
Okay.
And I was damn glad of that. I might not have been here either because that was the Germans and the Luftwaffe and Goering and so forth. They prided themselves on protecting Berlin, and they did for a long, long time until, frankly, they didn't have anybody left to protect them, and then they got hit quite often. The RAF loved to bomb Berlin. It was a payback for bombing London. You know? Yeah. So I didn't go, but our group had gone to Berlin, but I fortunately didn't go. Again, as I say, I've said it already. I might not have been here.
Right. Now, when they're having you do the aerial photography, what kind of targets do they want you to take pictures of, as far as you can tell?
Well, like the Schweinfurt ball bearing works. This is a tremendously important target. They wanted to know just exactly how much they got of it. So that's what we were taking. We were taking bomb strikes and bomb damage photographs, and some of them weren't too good because technology wasn't there like it is now. Highly successful infrareds and so on and so forth, where you could really get through all the smoke and crud. And they used to be on targets like that. If they had any idea they were going to be the target, they would have smokes rings all the way around the target, and it was dense as the dickens, and it'd go out quite a ways, and you couldn't really tell exactly where you were, you know. And we didn't have anything good enough to penetrate in those days to see where they were really over their targets. So it was at airspeeds and by direction and one thing or another. And you bombed on that basis, either that or you bombed what they call carpet bombing, and you got in the area just all opened up and it all went down, and they just covered the whole works.
Now, when you did that approach, was there something in the middle of it that was an industrial target to hit, or did you do that to cities too? We
did it for definite targets. We We didn't do for cities like Berlin and one thing and another. We went for definite targets. We figured if we're going to risk our lives going over there, we're going to go over to not to kill people, civilians and so forth, and knock down houses and stuff. We wanted to get a producer of engines or a ball bearing outfit or a refinery. Specific targets is what we were after. Like we went to the sub pens to get the and not only get the subs that were in there, but we also wanted to get the building, the capability.
Right, the repair sheds and all that.
Yeah. So.
Okay. At this point, I'm going to need to stop because the tape is just about out.
Okay.
If you want to get up, go to the bathroom, Mr. All right. Now, we were talking about some of the different things you did on the missions, and you had mentioned before the interview started that you did what you call a carpetbagging mission. Can you explain what that was and tell us what was going on there?
Well, carpetbagging missions were unusual and special missions put together with some of the allies of ours and what was known then as the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which has been replaced in modern days by an outfit called the CIA. And they're involved in all kinds of skullduggery and different things, and getting information that would be of vital use to how we were going to fight the war and what our allies were doing and what they weren't doing and one thing or another. And most of these carpetbagging missions were in compliance and in agreement with the British and the French and the Russians and what have you. And this carpetbagging mission that we went on, incidentally, we were all sworn to secrecy. In fact, I can't even really. I'm not even sure. I have an idea where we were, but I'm not totally sure. And I never saw a map on the thing, but I do know that there was a flight plan. The pilot was aware of the flight plan, and the man that was more than a navigator, he was not on the flight crew at all. He was a special passenger, if you want to call it that. He was involved with this mission. He knew where we were going. And the fact that we had been training, we trained after Ernie and I went on the special group that stopped at our air base and picked us up, which was sometime about mid-November is when we went with them. I think we wound up somewhere around in the general area of London, but I'm not sure because we went in these closed trucks to this place and went through the gate. And had a couple of MPs come on and check us all out to make sure we were who we were supposed to be and what have you. We never got off of that base, other than in the airplane.
Right.
And when we did get off the base in the airplane, it was to test some things. We test the position of the camera and one thing or another, and where the film would be kept, film packs would be kept, and one thing or another, and what I was supposed to do with them after I took them. And from there, we did the testing of the drag chutes and the system that they built for the drag chutes, and they took the ball turret out of there, and then took a lot of weight out of there when they took the ball turret out of there, and then this small pod that the drag chutes went in was nothing compared to what the ball turret was, and the ball turret was gone, and that was there. So getting any weight out of the airplane gave us better range, and the fact that we were using the long-range tanks in the bomb bay helped some too, and what have you. There was some tinkering done with the engines too, and we were using the B-24D because all in all it was a fairly smooth airplane. It was a lighter airplane than the H's and the J's that were flying in combat. So, and it was due for a long flight, and which I gathered from little glimpses of the ground that we weren't flying real high. We were flying. My judgment was we were flying about 2,000 or 2,500 feet. And where the routing went, I know it didn't go over Paris or anything like that because we didn't see anything that would approach a big city. Of course, the cities in those days weren't lit up anyhow. So, but you get an idea about where you could almost sense. I think even by atmosphere you could sense the heat coming up and one thing or another from the ground in any heavily populated areas. But I have an idea that we flew north of Paris
Mm-hmm.
and flew in an easterly direction north of Paris, maybe 50 or 60 miles north of Paris. And after we got to that juncture there, the airplane changed direction and went in a southeasterly direction, going toward the Balkans or somewhere in there. I know we were in Eastern Europe when we finally went in and landed,
Mm-hmm.
and we were notified by the pilot about making sure if for something happened that if the chutes did not deploy with a remote switch they were supposed to, Ernie and I, my buddy Ernie and I, we both had a release that we could release his on his side of the bomb bay or gunnery area, and mine on the other side. We release them, and the parachutes deployed and went out underneath the plane, and they do like these drag chutes they have in these modern jets and so forth. And they slowed it right down to practically nothing. I mean, it knocked you right off your feet when they finally popped.
All right. And why did they have the chutes on this particular plane?
Because they knew that they were gonna that landing strip was short, and and otherwise we'd run out of ground and we'd crash.
Okay. Now, so basically you're flying a mission. Were you taking pictures on the mission at certain points?
Yes, at
How did
certain
that work?
points. Yes, that worked because either the pilot or this special agent that was up in front was given the signals by him. He was pressing buttons based on where he thought we should be when we were in the target area. He put the red button on, and it would alert us, and we'd be in the station there to hit the switch on the cameras and run so many frames. In certain areas we'd run 5 or 8 frames, in other areas we'd run maybe 10 or 15 frames. And whatever that area was that they were interested in, you would frame them. Later on, I got the impression that some of those pictures they were taking were pictures being taken of the death camps. That they'd heard about them and one thing or another, and they wanted to verify it. And,
Now, were you over those during the day?
no, these
were at
missions were at night.
Okay.
Oh yes, we would never have made it very far during the day, all by ourselves. Yeah, we'd have been a fire down below.
But they had cameras that could take useful pictures at night?
Whatever it was, whatever the film that we were using or whatever it was, yeah.
Okay. And then about how long do you think you were in the air?
Oh, it was several hours. It was from leaving England to where we landed would have been about equivalent to what our penetration rates were when we were going over Germany, and those were anywhere from about 5 hours to maybe 6.5 hours. So we were in the air that long.
Okay. Now, when you landed, were you then you presumably landed someplace that was under Allied control?
Well, I think it was the partisans had it.
Okay.
That's
Given the distance, that would make more sense.
yeah.
Yugoslav partisans,
Yeah,
or
I think that's who initiated the whole request and need for that mission. Is I think Tito did. Yeah. Because I halfway thought I heard that name mentioned, but it was in foreign expressions, and never really sure. I'm not a linguist, so I have no idea. But they were all talking in other than English. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is at least possible that they were Slovak partisans. There was a Slovakian uprising at some point, but that was shorter, and I'm not sure how much went back and forth. But anyway, that
could have been Slovaks, could have been Slovaks and Polish or whatever it is, because they were all pretty.
Yeah. But given the amount of time you were flying, you probably wouldn't have gotten to stuff that was controlled by the Soviets at that point.
No, I think we were still west of where the Soviets were at that time. Yeah.
All right.
But they may have been sending something in that the Soviets would have been interested in, especially in some of those photographs we took. It might have been fortifications and so forth. We were trying to get better G2 on.
Yeah. Now, did you have problems on that mission? Did everything go right, or?
As we had some intruder night fighters that made a couple of passes at it. They weren't real sure who the hell we were, but they were pretty sure we weren't supposed to be there.
Right.
So they made a couple of passes at us and fired at us, and of course we didn't return fire because we weren't told to return fire, and all we had to do was hear from up front is when the hell you guys are going to start protecting us, and that was it, you know.
Mhm.
But it was a strange mission because you were told not to get trigger happy and one thing or another, give away, you know,
Right.
that we're there and one thing or another. But at the same time, when the other guys began to sweat, and we were doing plenty of sweating on our own and not shooting back, you know. When they said, "When the hell you guys going to respond to these turkeys?" You know, we did, you know. And on that flight, in the gun positions in the aft end of that airplane, we not only had regular machine guns, but we had 20 millimeters in there too. So we could line up with tracers with the regular machine guns, and when we got the tracers hitting what we thought was a target or the target area, then we released a few rounds of 20 millimeters, and they were really lethal. Yeah. So we didn't see any big explosion or anything like that, but I think we discouraged some guys from snooping too much.
Could well be.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what do you do for fuel on this trip, or how did you carry enough to?
In the Bombay tanks and the wing tanks.
Mm-hmm.
The Bombay tanks, you could carry enough fuel in the Bombay tanks to fly across the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the Bombay tanks and we had the wing tanks also, and they were all filled up when we left our original flight field.
Mm-hmm.
And there was enough fuel in those tanks to make it back, or make it back to at least an area like that, like down at the 15th Air Force, which is in southern Italy at the time. We could have made it to an air base down there, a B-24 base, so we could have landed down there.
Now, you mentioned one of the missions you were on. Somebody put the wrong kind of fuel.
Yeah, that's what we speculated happened.
Okay.
We speculated that when we were having trouble getting the altitude we were going to have to get in order to make it over a mountain range that we had to go over, that in good faith, not as anything that was trying to give us problems, not as somebody trying to hamper the mission. They poured aviation fuel in and filled up our wing tanks in good faith. And it was aviation fuel, and God only knows what the octane rating was, but we, in the States here, on some of our training missions, we flew with 88 or 90 octane fuel and knew it, that we had it in there, and we had problems doing what we could have been doing with 100 octane fuel. So it didn't take too long. In fact, those of us who were involved, naturally the pilot was very involved as far as engines are concerned, and had the responsibility of the flight engine responsibility. We're talking about it, and we said this damn thing acts like our training fuel was. And then we thought, well, God damn, we bet that's what the hell happened. The people it was aviation fuel to them. Aviation fuel is aviation fuel,
Right.
and if it goes in their airplanes, what the hell should go in this airplane too? So they just poured it in.
You think that was put into the tanks when you were at the place where
The
you
wing
landed?
tanks, yep,
Yeah.
yep. That's where it was put in. Yep, they filled us up. They topped it off. They were proud of it. We thought, oh, good Lord, because we didn't know they were going to do it.
Right.
Had we known they were going to do it, we'd have been right there and and said no.
Yeah. So how did that affect the performance of the plane then?
Didn't have the power.
Okay.
In spite of the fact we have turbochargers, it still didn't make the difference. If we hadn't had the turbochargers, we'd have probably really been screwed. Yeah, but they kicked in enough extra oxygen and so forth, and enough volumetric efficiency to keep us up there, and we weren't losing too much altitude, and we discussed whether we ought to start pumping in fuel into those tanks, back into the wing tanks from the Bombay tanks. But we figured, God, if we got contaminated fuel in the wing tanks now, we don't want to run a risk for kind of getting any backflow, having that stuff go back into our good stuff,
Right.
Because we could wean us off completely off the wing tanks and go to the Bombay, but we didn't know. We thought we even thought, but we might have to fly out to sea to get away from this whole thing, and being out over the damn water and not having enough fuel could be really bad. Yeah. This ditching in water is no fun.
But ultimately, you did make it back.
We did make it back.
They
Well, actually, what happened is, when we knew we weren't going to be able to make it over the mountain range, we had to decide right then and there. We bailed out. By the time our decision made and where we were with the airplane, we were approaching the mountains and couldn't get anything more out of the airplane, and we threw every damn thing that we could get out of the airplane. Threw it all out and trying to reduce the weight. We got, I don't know, we threw stuff out that we wondered whether it was smart even to throw it up, and we did. And
Did you still have the film on you at that point?
yes, oh, I sure did. Yeah, I had the film on me, and,
All right.
and it was my duty to get that film back if I could at all. So I had the film on me. Had a special pocket inside, yeah, all zipped up and one thing or another. Yep.
And where did you bail out over?
Over what looked like a plain. Plains like fields and so
Yeah.
forth, and rolling and one thing or another. And that's what it looked like from. This is now dark, no lights, no nothing, and we're at an altitude. We're up, right. We're 14,000. We were over 14,000. We were maybe 15 or 16,000 feet. And in the process of lightening everything up, we threw out our bailout bottles. Which you normally, if you bail out at high altitude, you have a bailout bottle, and you just hook it up with your oxygen mask,
Right.
and that's it. Well, damn bailout bottles got thrown out before we realized what the hell was happening. And so,
Okay.
where's our bailout bottles? Oh, God, damn. I knew that son of a bitch was heavy. Threw out the bailout bottles. No bailout bottles. So what do you do when you don't have bailout bottles and you have to go out? You go out in a free fall. So that's what we did. We went out in free fall in the dark. Like that. Hoping, you know.
All right. So then what happened?
Oh yeah, before that, I took the biggest dang thing I could find. I don't know what it was. It was a big heavy piece of steel tubing, and beat the hell out of the camera. I pulverized that baby. So if such thing would happen, that the airplane would go down and somebody can pull a camera and find out what it was and so forth, maybe that it would come home to roost some way. They would be making that same damn camera and doing taking photographs of us. So it was, to me, that was as important to beat that camera to death and make sure that was nothing but junk as it was to, you know, we had special explosive units in our bomb sites. We could set that too for 3 or 4 minutes and it would blow the bomb site all up. But I didn't have that in that camera, but all I had was something to just destroy the damn thing. Did the lenses and the whole works.
All right.
Then I shoved it out. I released it and shoved it out. So between me beating the hell out of it and it hitting the ground, there probably wasn't much left of that. Yeah. So, but at the same time, I did have the film. So got the camera out of the way, and we went out the camera hatch. We just leaned forward and went out.
All right. So then what? You're out in the middle of the air. You're free falling.
And yeah, it's free falling, and you're falling. The velocity of something falling through the air with nothing to hold you back, and you start gaining speed. And I think probably myself and the rest of the guys, by the time we'd fallen where air was dense enough to sustain us, we probably were falling over 100 miles an hour when we were falling. So pull the chute and wait for the snap, and boy, I'll tell you, when the snap was a snap, I'll tell you, yeah, at that rate of speed. And it did slow us down, and I had the largest parachute for me being 235 at the time with my gear on, which I'd gotten rid of some of that gear. I got rid of my flak suit and so forth because I wasn't going to need that anymore. Where my buckles and so forth came across, I was wearing olive drab undies on because that's what you had, and it actually that pigment in there went right into my skin, and I had some poor man's tattoos for quite a while, and a lot of ouchie and a lot of black and blue and one thing or another, but at least I was still whole, you know.
So what did you land on?
When I looked down, and it was now dark and I was away from the airplane and so forth, I looked down and I saw what appeared to be a river or a creek. I figured that if I could get myself over it 9 times out of 10, I wouldn't get tangled up with any trees or anything like that, get caught in a tree. So I worked my shrouds and spilled air and so forth and guided myself over to there, and I kept slipping there and coming right down over this thing. And when I got what I thought was second story height or something from the water, from the target I was shooting for, I by that time I already had these buckles on hook and so forth, and I was holding in by my elbows into the chute, and I just threw my hands up like so. And the chute being full of air and so forth, it pulled it right off of me, and I went right straight down. And while I was doing this, there was a little ground swell of air come through, and instead of me going down this way, I went down this way with my keister right there, and it would still been okay if it had been water, but it wasn't water. It was solid.
Oh.
And I thought, holy jumping Jersey. I thought, if you can see this from the air, from as high as we were, my thought was there would be running water, but I'd be falling into water. I didn't ever imagine there'd be ice there, but it was the time of the year there could be ice there, and it was in the mountainous area. So I thought, holy jumping Jersey. Lucky me, I hit the damn ice. But it wasn't even ice, and it wasn't a river. It was a road, concrete road.
So did you break your tailbone or your back, or?
Only reason why I didn't do that was I was very young, in pretty good shape, and had a lot of cushiony flight clothes on, and it was a hell of a shock to my tailbone and my spine and so forth. Enough of a shock that I just saw bright lights and one thing and another, and I was not here with anybody for a while, but I don't think it was very long. And when I finally came back around to the land of the living, I couldn't really feel my feet. Couldn't feel anything, either one of them, and it wasn't too good on this direction either. So I thought, oh Jesus, what do I do now? And while I'm trying to think about that whole thing, the next thing I know is I hear it's a huge, big, heavy-duty diesel engine. And tanks and other types of equipment like that have a big, heavy-duty diesel engine end like that. And I thought, oh my God, our reception committee, and I figured it was the kraut eaters who were after me. And so, and I can't do anything. I try to roll, and I just get almost halfway over, and I couldn't quite make it all the way. But after a lot of, and I scrub them like that, and I push them, digging them with my fingernails and so forth. I finally got to roll. Once I got to roll, I tried to roll a little faster, and I rolled to the edge of this strip of hard road. I want to say it was concrete. It sure felt like concrete. It could have been other things. I'm over there, and I'm praying like hell that I don't get under a tank track come along. And the next thing I know, here comes this big monster, and their big spotlights playing all over the damn place. And I thought, oh, I am really screwed because they're going to see me. And they did. And this big thing pulls up to me and stops. Big clattery engine running and so on and so forth. And I hear some guttural sounding voices and so forth. I thought, oh, man. But I didn't hear any bolts going in the rifle or anything like that, so I thought, well, at least they're not going to shoot me right away. Maybe they'll want to run over me or one thing or another. And on the outside of our uniform, we had flags on there and one thing or another, so American flag and one thing or another. And this next thing I know is this one guy, there was only one, come to find out. I thought maybe there's more than one, but he's talking to himself, and he says, oh my, he says, I got a Yankee airman. And I think that's what he said, but I heard the Yankee and airman, and I thought, okay. And he's not getting ready to shoot me or anything like that. And I thought, well, that's okay, let's see what happens now. And he comes over to me, and he looks, and he said, he said something like what I thought was no blood. He was Portuguese. He was from Portugal.
Okay.
And he was coming from a road from Portugal across the border down there into France, and the truck he was driving was a fuel truck. And I assumed he had gasoline or diesel fuel or something in there for kind of loud. They were bringing the Germans and the Free French. That was a laugh. Had bought fuel in Portugal or some agent or something and bought it, and it was sent over there. And this guy was bringing it over in this big truck at night, so he wouldn't get strafed by airplanes. They wouldn't see him. But all the damn lights he had on there for kind of loud, I think they could have seen him at the moon. But at any rate, he collects me up. He said, and somewhere along they get Yankee airmen, and I said, yeah, you know, and I pointed to the flag and one thing or another. And he said, you know, parachute. he said, shoot. And I said, yeah, shoot. And then he seen what was left of the harness on me. And when he finally got me into this was high. This was a huge damn truck. From ground to the so-called running boards, it must have been 4 feet. And by the time you got up to the seat area, from the ground, must have been close to 9 feet. Well, this guy gets this 200-some-plus guy up, picks me up, and gets me up to the friggin' seat. Of course, he wasn't being too careful, but I didn't give a damn. I didn't care at all, just to get. And without unhooking that trailer, and here he is down in a canyon with hardly much more width down there to maneuver than the width of that road with a small apron on both sides. How the hell he ever got that trailer turned around and went back to Portugal? I don't know, but he did. But he, on the way back, he told me, he says, I saw in the air. I saw what looked like an airplane. I saw some flames. There were some flames. For some reason, or something caught fire. And he said, I saw these big mushrooms up there in the sky. Parachutes. And he said, there were more than 6. Do you know how many? I said, yes, there were more than 6. I said, I don't really know how many, because from where I was going out, the guy ahead of me was the guy I saw, and then me, and probably the guy behind me was. There were 4 of us that went out the camera hatch, and the rest of the group went out the front. By that time, we got rid of our special visitor, and we didn't need. Let's see, did we have the? I think we still had the navigator, and we had the co-pilot. So there were 3 people up in front. That's all that was left up in front. There were 4 of us. 4 of us. We had a radio operator, and Ernie and I and somebody else went out the back. 7 of us went out. 7 of us got to Portugal. They got the other guys, brought them in too.
All right. Well,
then we were in a neutral country.
Right. I'm trying to. So did you? I know, but you would have. Where did he pick you up?
He picked me up officially in France.
But France at that point in time, if we've got our dates right, was in.
They were still
Allied hands.
No, not that part of France. Was not the southern part. They weren't really. They really weren't within the embrace of the Allied people for the whole country. Up and around where Paris and so forth was. Yes.
Well, but if this is, what month do you think this was?
North. Pardon?
What month was this?
This was in 1944.
Right.
Yes.
But what month?
It was in November.
Okay, but by November we landed in the south of France and gone up the Rhone Valley and all that kind of thing.
Well,
if he was taking you to Portugal, he'd have to go through Allied-controlled territory to get there.
He wasn't very far into France. I was just on this side on the east side of the mountain range, just on it.
Yeah, but still, to get to Portugal from there, he'd have to go through southern France in an area that was in Allied control, and then go through Spain.
In the middle of the night, with people running around there, you didn't know who the hell was in control. You just knew if sudden bullets started to come out of nowhere that somebody wasn't sure who the hell you were, and they're going to make sure.
Well, I guess the other question is, was he supposed to a smuggler or somebody who was bringing stuff from Portugal to German territory?
He could have been.
Because that would give a reason why he might actually be sneaking you through Allied territory, which he'd have to drive through.
He could have been. He could have been a known smuggler.
But he might have tossed you out of the truck at some point along the way.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't feel safe until he dumped me off in this little town just within Portugal. And I don't remember what the hell the name of the little town was anymore either. And let's face it, OSS wasn't too happy about getting a lot of information about me and the rest of the guys being around anywhere, because they told us just before we went off on this mission, coincidentally, you guys aren't going to get any recognition. You can't talk about this thing, and so on and so forth. We'll deny it. If you get killed or one thing or another, we know anything about you. The same thing that they did with Glenn Miller. He was on some kind of a special mission too. It was a good cover for him. He was on a special mission, along with supposedly going from point A to point B.
Oh, the standard version of that is he goes down the channel, rather than someplace
Yeah.
more interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, but that's certainly a pretty spectacular kind of adventure. How long did it take you to get back to England then from there? Or what happened to you once you got to Portugal? I
Once
guess,
we
first?
got to Portugal, they took us to their dispensary that they had there. The local doctor's office was not much more than a hotel room with a hospital bed in it and a bunch of cupboards with medical patches and one thing and another. And they put me on this bedboard, put me in there and strapped me down so I wouldn't roll off or anything like that, and gave me some sedatives and one thing and another, which I think I must have done on around the clock snooze. And after that, and I guess my muscles relaxed and so forth, and I found myself black and blue on my arms from about here all the way up to my shoulder, on both arms, and the same with the lower part of my torso where I struck. And I was held there, and in the meantime, somebody gets a hold of the American consulate, and they come in with a GI ambulance, one of ours with the markings and so forth on it, and pick me up there and take me back to where the hell, some big town in. I'd have to get out a map, and I think I could probably pinpoint it where it was. I wasn't being told too much of where I was or where I wasn't, but I did know that I was an American consulate, and I was within the American consulate when I got there and so forth, and they were all good U.S. doctors and so forth, and they were taking care of me. And they said, don't worry, Bill. We've got it all set up. You're going to get a good ride back to England, and from there you're going home. I said, I am. I didn't know the complete details in the bomb group at the time. They said, yeah, you're going home. I said, yeah, well, I know that. They said, no, you don't. I said, what do you mean I don't? They said, well, according to the Geneva Convention, if for any reason that you're fleeing to avoid capture into a foreign country, the Geneva Convention's made up that you were I forget what the hell they had a name for it, that you could not go back to that same zone of war, and you're going back to the States. I thought to myself, hey, I can't lose for winning here because I got 2 rides back to the States. I'm damn sure got this ride back to the States. And maybe I don't know. At the time, I thought, of course, I wanted to help finish the war. I wanted to go back to my group so we could help finish the war. But I guess if I'd have been thinking smarter, I'd have taken their offer, and that would have been it for me. I'd have been unassigned on my own and untouchable, almost. Right. Yeah. But at any rate, I wound back up with my bomb group, and people in our organization had to be aware of what was going on because there was no repercussions about me being gone or anything like that. And
so you were flying. You had been pulled out of your regular crew.
Yep.
Okay. What happened to the other guys who were on that plane with you? Do you know? Did they make it back?
They all made it back too. We all made it. We all made it back to this same little town just across the border. Yeah, and that's where we were all picked up. We were all picked up and loaded in the ambulance, and the doors closed, and we rode, and nobody could see how many guys were in there and one thing and another. And here's an American ambulance going back.
Was it possible that you actually landed in Spain? Because Spain was neutral but leaning to the Germans.
Yeah,
and there it wouldn't be.
Well,
so
there were damn near as many German agents in Spain as there were Spanish citizens. I think but
that would be a place where a Portuguese driver could smuggle you out.
Yeah. But at any rate, it seemed to me it was I know we were in Portugal. And that driver I thought was Portuguese that was driving this thing. Now, he may have been something else, but I thought he was Portuguese. And anyhow, and everything turns out I'm here, and I'm a little worse for the wear, but I didn't know about that for a long time. The results of the wear and tear in my old body, I'll tell you, didn't show up until about 10 years ago, and then I started to get payback. Old Arthur came visiting, arthritis, Mr. Arthritis, Mr. Roomy. And it's all settled in that bottom of that lower back. I used to walk 5 miles a day. Sometimes twice a day I'd walk 5 miles. Hell, I can hardly make it from here to the mailboxes over there. Now, but Jesus, I'm 83 years old.
Yeah. There's plenty of 83-year-olds who've come by that honestly without falling out of an airplane.
Yeah, yeah, really, and I frankly, I'm on my high school class reunion committee, and you'd be surprised, my classmates were kind of loud who were athletic as hell and didn't get the wear and tear on them and didn't have some of the experiences that I had. They're gone. They're gone 10, 12 years ago for crying out loud, you know.
Okay. Now let's get you back. You get back to the base, and you say you weren't obviously in any trouble. Now,
Well, the base was wired. They knew where we were going, what we were doing.
At what point did you unload the film you were carrying?
When I got to that consulate.
Okay. All right.
The consulate was the
It's U.S. territory.
Yeah,
at
that
point.
was U.S. territory, and that was where they were. And I got debriefed there also, and pretty much brought them up to date on what was going on and what the reception was when we got to wherever we were, Tito land I'll call it, and how we were handled and so forth. Because apparently they wanted some G2 on that mission to see whether they were going to agree with anything like that. And I'm not sure mine was the first one, but each one of those was a learning experience. I'm sure. Yeah. I know it was a damn good learning experience for me and Ernie.
Yeah.
We decided that we weren't going to become unknowingly, and I hesitate to use this word, heroes, but as Ernie would say, damn dumb heroes. That's what we were. So yeah, we decided we wouldn't do anything like that anymore.
All right. Now, when you got back to the bomb group, was that the point when the bomb group was about to be shipped back home?
Yeah, close to it. Yeah. I hadn't got back there very long, and we actually shipped out around the 1st of December, maybe a little later than that, maybe 5th or 6th, but it took us about 10 days or so to make it from Liverpool. And this time we landed in Boston. And we're in Boston. We landed in Boston. We hadn't hardly got tied up good at the docks there, and we were taken by special trucks. And I think once they started it up and got it in gear, it went to 70 miles an hour because I know we were going like hell. And we went to Bradley Field, Connecticut, which is near Hartford, and that was the first air base we were at right there. And when we got there about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Steaks, porterhouse steak, God, tenderloins about that thick and so forth. How many do you want, Sarge? I say I'll take one at a time. Everything I went with them, and oh my God, I'll tell you. And the PX is open all night long. You can go in there and buy any damn thing you wanted to, and you didn't even have to have money because hell, the payroll wasn't. Our payroll records weren't there for they were someplace. They were being sent ahead somewhere, and so if we didn't have any money, all we had to do was sign a voucher. You buy any damn thing you wanted in the PX and so forth. A lot of the guys that had committed themselves to the girlfriends that when they came home they were gonna be bringing rings with me and blah blah blah. Well, I had a couple of girls that I was kind of interested in too at the time, but it wasn't too sure. So I didn't do that rash thing at that time. Yeah. And 17th of December, right out there at the old train station on Laketon and Peck Street, I was pulled in on the 17th of December back home again for crying out loud, yeah. And I can remember walking down Main Street, downtown Western Avenue, either 18th or 19th, in my flight jacket. And it must have been 17 degrees above zero, and the people were bitching about how cold it was. And I said, compare this to 40 degrees below zero. Hell, it's like summer. Yeah. And they're all complaining about the tough deal they had. They couldn't get cigarettes and one thing or another. I'm saying to myself, boy, I'll tell you, I really feel for you poor guys. You can't get cigarettes, That was another thing, too. Over in England, I didn't smoke. I did for a short time, but I quit it because it was bothering my sinuses with flying high altitude all the time. I would take my cigarettes. Lucky Strike was one of the companies. Whoever the Reynolds, I guess, tobacco company was, had Camels, and I don't know who had Lucky Strike. They would always send cigarettes overseas for free. And I don't know how many damn packages of cigarettes I had. I'd go to town, You know, like the Pied Piper, giving out packages of cigarettes, not just cigarettes, but packages of cigarettes. And I could buy a whole big box. It used to, I don't know how many Hershey bars there used to be in a box, something like maybe 48 in a box. I could buy a whole big box for a nickel a bar. And like I say, Pied Piper, little kids just love me. The dads just love me.
Now, at that point, were you on furlough or?
No, that was when I was regular duty over there. And,
Okay.
Oh, but when I was in Muskegon, I was on furlough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And where did you go? And then did they send you back to Connecticut at that point, or did you base somewhere else?
we went back to Topeka, Kansas. Topeka, Kansas was the point of POE. Let's see, point of entry. But it was a ship out point there for air crews.
Right.
And we went back. We were sent back to the B-24 wing. Was going in and out of Topeka. Now I come to think of it, I guess that had to be that way because I never saw any B-17s in Topeka. Only B-24s. So the B-17 guys are being shipped out of a different place. Now, when we came back, our group came back to go on B-29s, and then there was after we went back to Topeka and we regrouped there. Then we went to Davis Mountain in Tucson, Arizona, and that was our air base there. And we had our B-29s there, and we each member of the crew that needed any special training was sent out to special training schools, and some of the guys went up to Boeing in Washington, and the pilots went someplace. Oh, they went to Maxwell Field, Alabama, and they had a bunch of B-29s down there. They got accustomed to and so forth, and flew them. And we were spread out all over.
And where did you go?
I went to Buckingham Army Air Force Base in Fort Myers, and that's where they didn't have B-29s flying there, but they had B-17s and B-24s rigged up with a B-29 system in them, and we trained and flew in them.
Okay. And then were you preparing to go and then fly B-29s in the Pacific then?
Yep.
All right.
That's what we were destined for that, and after we had our training and run enough flights as a crew again on B-29s like we had done on the B-24s, and we flew as far as Brazil on the B-29s. That was a flight from Tucson, Arizona to Brazil and back. And after we had enough of those flights and got our bomb dropping down and all of our training flights, our training hours, we went from there back to Topeka again. And from Topeka we went to Fairmont, Nebraska, a little old farm town in Fairmont, Nebraska. Fairmont was about the size of, wasn't as big as Fremont. About the size of, but not Custer. The other town right up there by Custer, bigger than, between Ludington and Custer, can't think of the name of it now. Scottville?
Okay.
Scottville, about the size of it. And there was a neat little town and so forth. And there was an air base there. And they had trained B-17s and B-24s at one time. And they brought the B-29s in, and we got our airplane that we were going to fly overseas with. And after we were there about 3 or 4 weeks, we had some conversations with the ground crew, and we found out who our mechanics were going to be in the crew and when they were there. The next thing we know, we didn't see them anymore. They were already on their way over there.
Right.
They were on the damn boats on the way over there for kind of low, and the guy comes around and Enola Gay drops the bombs, and he said, when the notice came out, the bombs were dropped. They had the listening units for Japanese subs and so forth. He said the whole convoy stopped, and he said we had a wingding on the deck of the ships we were on. And the next thing we know is they heard, you may have heard maybe on television and so forth, the sound of the destroyers, whoop, whoop, whoop. Well, all those damn destroyers are doing that, and they're churning around in the water. We wondered, what the hell, how many Japs have we got after us and so forth. And they went out and did a couple of figure eights and so forth, and they stopped dead in the water, and they just blew their whistle just straight on for a few minutes, and the next thing we know is I wasn't on it, but this I knew. I talked to the ground crew guy. He said next thing you knew is they fired the ships up again, and they said they turned them around, went right back to Washington. They went someplace in Washington, Bremerton or someplace like that, and got off, and that was it. And everybody went back to their nearest large base, and they were stagnant for several months. I did that too. I was stagnant for about a month and a half in Fairmont, which is kind of neat. It was a nice little town. I got a hell of a bang out of it. It was kind of like home, and the people were great. And then the next thing I know is I get called up, and they said, you were on a B-29 crew, weren't you? Yeah. How much did you know about the B-29? Yeah. You were a specialist on central fire control systems, weren't you? Yeah. Well, we've got shipping orders for you. You're shipping out. I'd already set up a job with Consumers Power.
Yeah.
I had a job set up for as soon as I got out of the service to go right to Consumers Power and start working, rather than going back to Continental Motors. Taking advantage of the electronics training I had and so forth. So, of all things, they sent me down to a place called Peyote, Texas. Now, I bet you've never heard of Peyote, Texas.
Actually, I have, because other airmen I've talked to went through there at one point or another.
Good God, they have my sympathy. Oh, talk about the armpit of the world. That's it, you know. And without anything to keep from smelling, because that was a terrible place. It was 15 miles from absolute nowhere. And the wind blew so damn hard down there that they had cables that big around made out of stranded steel to hold the damn barracks down, like holding tent ropes, holding the barracks down. There was cactus all over the damn place, and it was just a nothing. They flew in B-29 after B-29 and P-51s and Black Widows and one thing and another, and stored them out there on that damn desert. You could look down there and for miles and see them. And I knew what they had to do to mothball the gunnery systems and armament on the thing. So that was my job, and I couldn't get out of it for 3 friggin' months. And I tell you, I had a lot of calls, and I had people calling me congressman and one thing or another. And finally, when we got so many planes, and they had a marker in their head of how many planes they wanted to have us take care of, which we finally did, and I didn't know it. But it was a blast down there. And what really rankled me is all the permanent parties down there. They've been there all during the war. They hadn't faced any kind of. They all shipped out and got their damn discharges, and there we were stuck down there for kind of long. That really rankled me. And we had a non-commissioned officers club down there that was really, it looked like a nightclub. Everything, shrimp, oysters, steaks, you name it. We got to close that baby up, spend the money, but hell, it was no women. There wasn't any women around for miles. I had more social life in England for crying out loud overseas than I had down there, but I was stuck down there for 3.5 months, and when we got so many airplanes, we didn't know what the hell the number was, because we'd have probably worked half the night to get that number in so we could get the hell out of there. But when we got rid of them, it was. What do you mean you're going to the shower? The hell you are. You're shipping out. Go get your duffel bag and so forth. And there's a space right over there. Get on that truck. You're gone. You know. Twist my arm. Where am I going? Well, we have a delay en route. Well, where's the delay en route to? Muskegon, Michigan. We're sending you home, and you can stay around there, stick around there for a couple of weeks, and then they've got a termination date for you at Chinook Field in Rantoul, Illinois, and that's where I got my discharge.
Okay. Then when you finally got home, what did you do?
I had this job offer at Consumers, and I had 6 months to return to my original job, which was Continental Motors. But I had this new job offered to me, so what I did is I tried out the Consumers job, and it was a nice job. But I wanted to I didn't want to spend all my time inside and in the lab and so forth. I wanted to go out, where as I considered, and I was working. First job I had was working on watt-hour meters, the meters you have at the house and the industrial meters and so forth. They stuck me on the residential, which is there was nothing to it. And what I was interested in is getting into those 3-phase and 4-phase industrial meters, because that's where the electronics were, and that's what I wanted to follow. Well,
Right.
it didn't come through, and I kept mentioning, yeah, we'll get to you eventually and so forth. So about that time, my time was coming up in the 6 months that I had before I could go back. So I said, screw it. And plus, I went back to Continental making 40 cents an hour more than I was working on consumers, and that did it for me. And I eventually wanted to become a master mechanic, following that interest that I had with Ford Motor, and I figured that working back at the Continental was the route to that, more so than working at consumer. So that's what I did. And I went back there and worked for Continental Motors for about 6 or 7 years, and I finally was working on special assignment as a technician in research and development for Continental on Packard engines and one thing or another. A Packard engine is a power source that powers the high efficiency pumps that fills jet airplanes and so forth with fuel. I was working with that, and the government was interested in that. But in the meantime, a buddy of mine that I'd worked with at Continental and kind of run around with, he was single and I was single. I hadn't seen Wally for quite a long time, and one day at the beach I saw him and said, "Where the hell have you been?" And he says, "You probably have come to the conclusion I don't work at Continental anymore." I said, "Yeah, I haven't seen you any place." And I asked 2 or 3 people in the union, if you were there, and they said, "No, he's not with Continental anymore," but they didn't know where the hell you were. "Where are you?" "I'm with GE, the jet engine plant in Cincinnati, Ohio." I said, "You are?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "What kind of outfit's that?" He said, "Best damn place." He says, "Continental's in the dark ages compared to this place." So I said, "Gee, I may be interested in that myself." He said, "Okay." He says, I'll get a couple of application forms and send it to you. It'll be a notation in each one, which I'll write in, recommended by Walter. I can't remember what the hell Walter's last name was right now. But at any rate, he got paid $50 for lining me up.
He recruited you. Yeah.
Yeah, he recruited me for the recruiters.
Yep.
And so when the recruiters came in town, they got in touch with me, and I went down to see the recruiters. They were down at the Occidental Hotel, which you've never seen because it hasn't been there for years. They demolished it. Went down and talked to them, and sounded pretty damn good. Jet engines, new thing. Internal combustion engines have been around for a long time, but gas turbines haven't. So I thought, well, okay, I'm a young man. I might as well get in down the ground floor. So I went down. I passed my interview, and about 3 weeks later, I get a request to come down for an interview. And at one time, Jesus, getting a flight out of Muskegon to go to Cincinnati was so I thought, well, how else? And they paid for everything. How else am I going to do? At the time, I had a 3-year-old Ford. I forget what the hell, and it was good shape, and it was a good runner. I'll drive. So I come home at night. Let's say my interview was going to be on a Thursday. I come home at night at 3 o'clock. I was in the house about 4 o'clock. And I'm at that time I'm working a final assembly on the big new tank engine that they had, the 12-cylinder, the 8-cylinder. I wasn't really dirty, a little smelly from sweating and so forth. And my wife says, "Take a shower and all that stuff." I said, she'd been driving that day. I said, "Can you get a hold of your sister or someplace like that and tell them that to take you wherever you have to go, because I'm going to be gone for a couple of days on this interview." Turned the switch on the car, and she already had my luggage packed for me for kind of long. Threw them in a car, took off, and drove to Greenville, Ohio. Do you have any idea where Greenville, Ohio is?
No.
Do you know where Hamilton, Ohio is? Or do you know where Cincinnati
Yes.
is? Greenville, Ohio is up old US 27, which went straight up through Michigan, up through Lansing and so forth, all the way, and goes down south quite a long ways too. Went through Cincinnati, I think it went into Kentucky. But I got connected up with Route 27, And as I say, I left Muskegon. This is in October, whatever that year was. Okay, I know what year it was. 52. Went down for that interview, but on the way down, God Almighty, it was a long damn trip down at night, and I'm tired. I worked all day long and so forth. I finally get to Greenville, and Greenville, Ohio, has a rotary right in the middle of town. It's a county seat,
Yep.
and they got a big capitol and everything there, and they have a big fountain and everything else. They've got a rotary right in the middle of 27, and you can't go straight. You got to go around this damn rotary and back up. And I'm so damn sleepy, I damn near run right into that rotary. And right down in there, I said, "Bill, it's motel time," you know. So there's no the little town again. There's no motels in this town. Was about the size of Ludington. But in those days, they used to have places for tourist rooms. You probably never remember ever seen any tourist rooms at your age, have you? No. They had in nice houses. Instead of having board and breakfast, they had tourist rooms. You didn't get any board or breakfast. You just went for I think $3.50 or $4. Nice room, nice clean bed, everything all to yourself. So I knock on the door and get this party up. And the lady came down to look first, but she didn't come because she saw it was a man. So next thing I know, Dad came down, and he talked to me, and I said, "Do you have any rooms available?" "Yeah, we do, but we're not our custom." There were lights and everything. They said, "Our lights are all out. Don't you get the hip or not?" I said, "Mister," I said, "I'm so damn sleepy. I damn near run into your fountain downtown here. As big as that is, you damn near run into it." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You are sleepy, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." So he said, "We'll give you a room." So I stayed in Greenville that night, and I drove on down, right on down for my interview the next morning. All guys about my age, all interested in jets and one thing and another, and airplanes and what have you. And I went to work for General Electric. I went to work as an engineering technician, and I knew all about manufacturing. I knew all about machining and so forth. And I was working right in the design and development group with all the engineers, and I was recommending when they put dimensions down on the blueprint what to put down that's realistic, what isn't realistic, and what the hell you describing that dimension has to be plus or minus 3 thousandths. Your hair is 2 thousandths. When you got a yard of nothing out there, what do you care whether it's 2 thousandths? It could be a 16th of an inch, other than the fact that maybe a little extra weight there. Gee, we never really thought of it that way. So that's the kind of work I started out doing with them. Eventually, they had me going to school, and I went to school. Oh yeah, that was one of the things that dangled in the front of my face too. Of course, I was subject to being able to GI loan. I could have had lots of time on GI loan, but here's this company offering to send me to school.
Sure.
And the best deal about that, even better than a GI loan, they were going to send me to school, and the hours I was going to spend in school, but I was going to be paid for them at the same rate I was getting when I was working for them. So
That's pretty good.
Couldn't go wrong with that. So I went to school with them, and the next thing I know, I was rated as an engineer and became a project engineer for them and so forth. And then I decided that gee, if I could have that kind of success with gas turbines, what could I do in the company itself? And that was where I made a screw up. I screwed up there. I should, because at gas turbines, we're all young, we're all about the same, and so on and so forth. You get into the old divisions of the company for crying out loud, and boy, oh boy, oh boy, have they got things stake out for themselves and each other, you know. Here comes this hot dog, newcomer from outside, you know, like that, you know. So eventually I left GE and I went with Raytheon and one thing or another. Worked on radar systems, and worked on a SNAP 7 generator, and what's that? SNAP 7 generator is nothing but a small mini nuclear reactor. And where are they using them? Well, one place I know they use them is the Antarctic and the Arctic itself to generate electric power there by Nuki. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a lot of what you wound up doing after the war is kind of ties into some of the kinds of things that you were doing during it.
And you know, not being afraid to try something or go somewhere. So yeah, really was. Yeah.
And what would you say kind of the overall effect of having served in the military was for you? How did it affect you as a person or your career or whatever?
Well, I think it rounded me out more. It gave me a better appreciation for the other guys, because the other guys were just like me, only they were in other bodies, you know, and they all had objectives and things of interest and so forth they were in. It gave me a better appreciation for that. Some of the people that were in charge, it mystifies me, other than the fact of what I said earlier about someone was only there because they had political connections someplace, so they didn't know from one end to the other, you know, and they were in a position where they were determining for what your life was going to be like, and that's a crock. I never did go along with that. One of the things I didn't like about the service, because I felt if anything that was screwed up and wrong in the service, and still is the caste system that they have for kind of now between the enlisted personnel and the officer corps. I just think that's unrealistic, and fortunately all the officers weren't that way, but some of them were. Some of them really were, and they didn't give a diddly rip. They only cared about themselves. But fortunately, that isn't the case all over. But the best officers I ever ran across were the officers that went through the schools, went through the cadet program. They were very, very knowledgeable. They knew what cause and effect was, and so on and so forth, and they knew that their genius wasn't going to make the difference. It was going to be what they knew and being able to apply it through other people for kind of allowed to come up with a common result. Those are the good guys.
All right, that about concludes the tape, and it seems to be a pretty good point to conclude the interview. So
Yeah,
thank you
for
very
sure.
much for
Yeah.
taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you. Yeah.